The Process, a podcast about creativity and experimental music. In the world of experimental music, outcomes and accolades for creators can be uncertain and at times seem far and few between. Therefore, creators and practitioners of experimental music must embrace the one thing they will always have complete control over: the process. This podcast aims to understand this creative process by listening to new works and discussing them with their creators. Each episode focuses on one creator and their music. Understanding how and why they create can inform aspiring creatives and help audiences better understand and navigate experimental music. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and I'll be your host as we explore the world of experimental music, creativity, and the human need to find purpose in their world and lives. This is The Process. Philip Blackburn is a composer/environmental sound artist born in Cambridge, England, and studied music there as a choral scholar at Clare College. He earned his PhD in composition from the University of Iowa, where he studied with Kenneth Garbo, and began work on publishing the Harry Partch archives. Blackburn's book, Enclosure 3, Harry Partch, won an ASCAP Deems Taylor Award. He worked at the American Composers Forum from 1991 until 2020, running the Innova Recordings label, which has been called the nation's premier label for American new music, producing over 650 albums and garnering 2 Grammy Awards, while developing re-granting programs, notably the Jerome Commissioning Program and McKnight Fellowships. In 2020, he took over the Neuma Records label. On today's episode, we listen to Melody from the Still Motion album with performances from percussionist Patti Cudd on Sideband Records.
I think a couple of examples of memorable sonic activities happened in my youth. Mm-hmm. One of which was walking around the Liverpool docks, which had been abandoned from their shipyard building days. Mm-hmm. And I noticed a giant foghorn down on the ground level next to the river there, and I cleared out the beer crates and things, and using my best trombone embouchure at the time, I crawled around the floor and made a very, very, very loud sound, mm-hmm. which reverberated around the whole shipyards. People walking their babies and dogs and jogging along all stopped to see what was happening, and they all kind of tittered and laughed at me. But as soon as I walked on, I found them doing the same thing.
Right.
So I recruited gangs that day to the phenomenology of acoustics. Yeah. And also near my village growing up in England, there's the Blowing Stone. This is where King Alfred would go and call his troops from all the Berkshire Downs, which is just a big old limestone thing that looks like Swiss cheese. But again, you could make a very loud sound that reverberated through the hills.
Sure. So
somehow being outdoors and part of nature, and specifically, I think, resonance and coupling, the things that I took from that. I remember singing the first dress rehearsal note of Carmina Burana by Carl Orff in the neighboring girls' school gymnasium. And this is our first rehearsal with the orchestra in this giant space. And I was up on one of the risers ready to sing my first note after the initial downbeat. Fortuna, da, 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 da. And I heard that downbeat. Was there 150 people in that orchestra, all with tam-tams and brass and everything else? Wow, that blew me away. I could not sing my entrance just from the effectiveness of that sound. And I think more specifically, as it became refined, you get to sing Thomas Taller's 40-part motet in King's College Chapel, and you think, this is a coupling of acoustic with space. This is a giant instrument. This music was designed specifically for this kind of environment, and it works nowhere else in quite the same way. So not just resonating those frequencies, but the standing waves you set up. And so, being part of that polyphony, which in turn is an activator for a space, is one of the most inspiring things, whether it's part of ship's horns or part of a rainforest.
And I think the concert venue, especially sometimes in experimental music, can be just that black box space. That place, it's downtown somewhere, there's 6 people in the audience. So I love this idea that, and it's a very Cagean thing that, the space is the place, and the space is the piece. So when do the musicians get involved in this process, and what do the scores look like to communicate with them?
I think as a composer, especially a soundscape composer, my job is to use all the available resources to meet people where they are and make the most interesting thing that I can, given those, what some would call limitations. I love to work with professional musicians who have chops on their fiddles and axes, and they can do great stuff. And a lot of people have, done that before me and in very sophisticated manners. It's a lot of work. But I also love working with what you call amateurs, or even people that don't consider themselves musicians or performers. I think we spend a lot of time focusing on the supply end of the equation in the act of composition. It's as though the score is the music, and, come along and do it if you can. And I've got some of those pieces, of course, that are very difficult to do, and you need a lot of practice. And then, the same 17 people are going to hear them applaud at the end and say, well, that was a lot of work, but well done, good job. And next, what's next? But when your focus is on kind of the other end, the receptive end of new music, that's when you're really trying to create an occasion or an event where listening is the result, and anyone can listen. So I'd much rather, create a piece for a sewer organ. I mean, take the sewer system beneath the Mississippi River here in St. Paul, and once you've got permission again from the public art people and the post 9/11 manhole cover people, and you've got a map of the sewage system that you promised not to share with terrorists. Now you can do some test tones, and now you can do that underground resonance thing that I've been talking about, creating a piece of music that's going to come out of the storm drains. In turn, that's going to, have the simple effect of bringing awareness and consciousness to what's beneath our feet. We look at architecture and the things around us, but what about all the hidden things, the hidden sounds and the hidden spaces that actually sound and the ears can awaken us to much better than our eyes, for instance. So in that case, that was kind of a solo activity. And then it's a played back composition that comes from an unusual kind of guerrilla public art intervention. But then you see people responding and participating in various ways, because again, as they're meandering along the river hand in hand or chasing their dogs or whatever it is, it affects their behavior for that moment, and they're never quite the same again. And people come up to me this day saying, oh, were you the guy who did the car horn fanfare or this really strange occasion? So there are certainly ways in which I've involved people, people who are training to be part of a biomusic curriculum in North Carolina with Dr. Patricia Gray some years ago. I was in residence, creating instruments out of that particular local area. So let's go to the trees. Let's see what sounds we can make. Can we make flutes from this? Can we make leaf sounds from these? Can we, often there's traditional culture involved as well. Like, I did a piece at the Minnesota State Fair, and a friend said, oh, are you going to do cornstalk fiddles? I'd never heard of cornstalk fiddles, but get me a cornstalk, of which there are several trillion around here, and show me how to string these, and we'll make a little ensemble out of this. So it's actually much more homegrown than bringing exterior ideas into a blank space. And you're absolutely right. Finding something interesting that only I could do, that brings a fresh approach to the blank slate, as it were, of a concert hall is the hardest thing I can do. Someone asked me to write them a guitar piece. There's nothing that I can think of doing on a guitar that a professional virtuoso guitarist hasn't already done. And, millions of other guitarists who've fiddled around in their bedroom making more interesting sounds that I can get from a guitar. What can I do? What can I do? And it wasn't until I started, bowing one with fishing line that I realized, I have never heard anyone do this. I think I found a new way of playing the electric guitar. And I can make this into a spectral drone composition that sounds electronic, sounds very, very complex out of the most simple thing you can possibly imagine. And having revealed this secret, discovered it as I were, obviously everyone's going to want to copy me because it's such a genius thing. How can I prevent that? How can I put my copyright on this and get all the royalties that are sure to flow from this? I know what. Why don't I just share it with humanity? And so that there's no, written score for this. I could tell you in the audience right now how to play my piece, Weft Sutra. You got a guitar and you tune it in this certain way, and you get some rosin fishing line, and you do this, that, and the other with it to kind of combine a hurdy-gurdy with a drone effect. And these are the sounds that you can play with once you improvise with them. And it's part Tai Chi and part, hallucinatory, trippy time. But the way that I created the score for that it's on a YouTube link. It's an instruction video. So from day one, it is an oral tradition. The next person who sees that or shares it says, oh, well, I can do that. Whether I call it Blackburn's Weft Sutra or say that I invented it, or if I get 30 people to do it with their guitars, I love the idea of kind of kicking off an oral tradition that in this case, my ego steps aside, and it's going to be the dominant way of playing electric guitars from henceforth, I'm quite sure.
Well, and YouTube itself is an environment. The internet and the World Wide Web, if you will, is a environment, is a space within itself. And, the modes of communication in that space, the idea that you're making sort of a tutorial video, that's pretty much the main way of communicating on YouTube with people, or one of the reasons people use it as a resource.
Right. So I think a conventional score can only ever result in conventional music. If you're dealing with those, 12 steps or whatever they are, and quarter notes and crotchets and quavers, as we used to call them, and, the guitar and the drums and the bass, as GarageBand tells you we need to have, you're going to be limited in your imagination. The reason that I want to compose, of course, is to subvert my own preferences and learn something through the process. Ideally, learn something about myself. Maybe find a piece that wasn't in me, that I didn't realize was in me until I went through this kind of uncomfortable process. So, working with familiar materials is going to it's just a generative process. It's though I'm filling a need that I'm creating in society that's maybe marketable. It maybe creates content for someone who's looking for content. But all of those things are such trammeled, tunnel ways of thinking that I prefer to reduce my output in favor of a few unique things. And the more that I kind of infer an ordering about the compositions from something I've never experienced before, the more I've discovered and the more unique I find that contribution to be. okay, melody began. I'm going to have to backtrack a little ways here. 2003, I think, I was at Burning Man when it was still cool. I'm told I haven't been back since. Cool. But anyway, I wanted to make a wind harp because I knew that there was going to be some wind there, and have something that would fit in a suitcase, not damage the environment, not be overly complex, but complex means with simple results. And sure enough, I found it setting up with a steady state of wind flow over, in this case, fishing lines with cat food can resonators and some Dixie cups and some 1/4-inch Mylar tape, and all of this stuff produced some amazing sounds. And so over subsequent years, I refined these wind harps and made them smaller, down from 50 feet to 20, and then to like 8 to 6. And so now I've got a variety of wind harp designs, which build on the tradition of Aeolian harps that have been remarked in history over the years. Like you leave a harp or a dulcimer in your window and it produces these strange overtones. So I'm building on that tradition. But I've set these things up in various public art settings over the years, and I've also tried to record them because they produce really weird whistling tones, some of them enharmonic, some of them not. Of course, the very thing that activates a wind harp sound is the very thing that makes recording difficult on a microphone. It sounds like wind on the mic. Terrible.
It's a horrible kind of like huffing type sound. Yeah, it doesn't translate. Yeah. So sometimes I tried contact mics and the rest of it. But what you hear is 12 minutes in the life of my backyard wind harp a few years ago. And I think it was really cold that night, so there weren't any other sounds going on in Minnesota winter. And then sometimes I just enjoy listening to that by itself. Time passed and I thought, technology's improved. My ear training at school wasn't that great, but I wonder what those pitches are. Oh, look, I found a piece of software here that can actually pick out the prominent tones and, as it were, make audio wave file into MIDI information. I wonder what this would look like as a musical score in 12-tone equal temperament. And I found a way to do this, and it spat out the most dense, complex-looking score you could ever imagine. Because every time it heard one of these weird whistling sounds, it came up with the closest approximation, and it was all over the keyboard, as it were. After some false starts with organists and pianists, I found Patti, who is a real trooper, an amazing performer on all percussion instruments, and especially with electroacoustics. She said, "Write me something." So I said, "Be careful what you wish for. Here you go." Now, simplified through the lens of a vibraphone, can you do all of these things and stay in time and do 4 chords at once and then jump around the keyboard? Well, after a click track was invented, and after months and months of practice, she said, "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but one of the most rewarding." And when I first heard her do it live in a rehearsal, I said, and she kind of looked for approval. I said, "That's just the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." And it was true at the time. One of the things I'm so drawn to pieces like this and music in general is when there is sort of the illusion of environment or nature. And, talking about how wind is perhaps moving the electronic part or creating this, and it's sort of these gusts of complexity and then simplicity. That was my overall impression. And I felt as a listener, and maybe you can speak on this, I felt as a listener, I didn't need to be listening to every moment, but I needed to be aware of the sort of larger landscape that was unfolding.
Absolutely. So I think of, if I had to genreify my work, I now think of it as ambient complexity. So coming in and out of awareness and attention and focus is all part of it, because the ultimate goal is to refocus your own experience of how to notice yourself noticing. Some years ago, I started an investigation of composition as meditation. So, in Zazen, you try and empty your mind and you pay attention to the gaps between things. So this is a kind of amplification of that, blown up to a much larger perspective. So the gaps between things, and as soon as you come out of meditation or out of that kind of empty space, you say, "Okay, I'm just going to take a breath and let it go again, let it go again." No, let it go again. And so I think my compositional kind of strategy is to do the same thing when you experience my music. So it's absolutely fine to go in and out. And if you want to go and make a cup of tea, it won't be that much different when you come back. Feel free to experience it any way you want. In this case, in the recording, you can come back 1,000 times if you want and follow it. You could transcribe it if you really had a mind to. But it's going to be different each time. I remember the sewer organ piece that I did where I introduced sounds beneath the ground coming out of the manhole covers. As people walked away, you could see them listening to birds in the trees. You could see them paying attention to the traffic. I said, yes, score for John Cage. I've sharpened the awareness, at least for a moment, maybe an hour or two. So if this is all listening practice, that's fine by me. I think the word creativity is kind of used as a cudgel sometimes to separate us. Who's creative, who's not? I prefer to think of the difference as what William Blake called the devourer and the prolific. There are those who consume and those who make stuff. But if you think about creativity in a much larger world, it's really the process of cognition. It's using language to make sense of your environment so that you can get out of bed in the morning. And music, in this case, is a prelingual activity. It's sharing sounds in society, the individuals and society, using listening and sound making, noises, grunts, and everything else, as though to develop a meaningful language to grow up and mature. When I travel the world and they say, you're a musician, that's a universal language, I say, okay, that's kind of a platitude, but let's go with it for now, because I fundamentally disagree. It's the thing that divides us as much as unites us.
Well, then once you say you're a musician, they ask you what instrument do you play?
I was a live voice of Vietnam radio when I said that, and they handed me a broken guitar and told me to sing one of my songs to all of the girls out there. I didn't know how to explain in Vietnamese why that wasn't viable.
So I guess one of the ways I interpret being creative as a primal urge too is this idea that people, creatives explain the experience of creating being something that when they don't do, it affects their mood, it affects their sort of mental perspective. Some people point it out as being the reason they get up. They have to get up for work, but the reason they get up is because they know at some point they're going to be able to create. So how does that factor into your life? Like, how is creativity part of your lifestyle? How necessary is it?
I think for some people, the idea of being productive it begins at the piano keyboard or with the pen and paper, with a blank slate kind of thing. And I'm absolutely the opposite end of that. That's the fearful thing which I can't get beyond. And I think that's also part of my analysis of how this all works anyway. I think composition teaching, creative teaching, has to do with, here are some models of how people have done it in the past. Copy them, find a blend of things you like and go out and, spit it out for the rest of your life, because that's your brand. Those are your preferences. You are nothing more than the sum of the things you like, and add some craft and skill, and you can go and produce, and you can participate in this economy of being productive. I'm the opposite, because I would rather start with nothing. Starting without an idea is the best thing you can possibly do. The big turnoff is the assumption that you have to have an idea before you can set foot on a journey.
It's sort of like taking a walk in the woods, right? Or going on a hike. I mean, you step out of the car, you step onto the path, and yeah, there can be things, there can be some expectations about what that hike's going to be, but pretty much you're at the mercy of the trail and the environment, and that's a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun.
Right. There's a book called Composing a Life. So, yeah, that's kind of what we do, but it's actually more improvising a life. And it's not finished until, your last breath. And then it all makes sense. Oh, now it's got structure. But at the time, it was made up of a billion different little decisions.
Yeah. I feel it's more of like crafting a paper mache disaster is maybe more accurate. Well, thank you so much for Philip, for your time today and your insight. And I love this idea of how important the environment is, and that this experience in itself will get me thinking now as I'm writing and working on pieces. And I'm sure as people listening will be thinking more about, but where is this going to happen, and how is that going to influence my creation of the piece? Let's take a moment here and tell us, or tell our listeners a little bit about where they can find more about you, your music, and the specific recording that we listened to today during the episode.
If you're interested in finding out more about Philip Blackburn, go to philipblackburn.com. There's a whole bunch there. Yes, I'm on social media, but, start with the website. There's links to pretty much everything I do there. I also happen to run a record label, Neuma, which is Neuma, neumarecords.org. So that's kind of a larger compositional activity as well, helping others, put their work out into the universe. So that's another aspect to this whole thing. In the case of melody, it exists on a wonderful CD and Bandcamp download near you. On the Sideband Records label, go to do a search on Bandcamp, and Patti Cudd, Patticudd, Patti Cudd is the wonderful percussionist who put together an album called Still Motion.
Thanks to Philip for sharing his time and music with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please check out other episodes in the series, and as always, like, subscribe, or leave a comment on your preferred podcasting app. I'm Dr. Doug Bielmeyer, and this has been The Process.